Hello and welcome to the ILO's Future of Work podcast. I'm Justin Smith. Today, we could not have a more fitting episode for the Future of Work podcast because we are talking about the future, specifically how to prepare for a future of uncertainty and disruption. Before I introduce today's guest, take a second to imagine what you would do if a swarm of drones closed all air traffic over the Atlantic. Or if that's not close enough to home, what if a cyber attack on a messaging platform were to expose billions of people's private chats on the web? Okay, so maybe you miss your flight to Toronto, or your boss discovers an embarrassing chat between you and your colleagues. But beyond their immediate impact, consider the cascade of events that each of these scenarios could unleash and the consequences they could have for our societies, our economies, and the world of work. As we've seen over the past decade, from wars to pandemics to technological upheaval, the question isn't if disruptive events will take place, it's which disruptive events will take place. So what can we do? How can we learn not only to expect the unexpected, but to plan for it and be ready when the next shock arrives? To help me answer this question, I'm joined by Rafael Peels, a labor relations specialist at the ILO, who's here to tell us about strategic foresight, a methodology for navigating times of disruption like the ones we happen to be living in. Rafael, thanks for being with us.
With all pleasure.
So, what is strategic foresight? How does it work, and why do you think it's so important right now?
Let me start with the why question. So you already said it. We are living in a world, including a world of work, that is marked by disruption. You cannot open the newspaper, or there is a heat wave or a flooding somewhere. And the same is true for AI and how that shakes up our world of work, or international trade and geopolitics. So if disruption is the new normal, we have to make the ability to deal with that disruption the new normal too. Yet we often respond or react, or not, to shocks rather than prepare, anticipate for them. However, there are tools to do this: strategic foresight. And that brings me to the what question. So strategic foresight is a tool to do strategic thinking, focusing on forward thinking in the long term, looking at the big drivers of change, how these impact labor markets, and with that, our constituents. Secondly, it allows us to address uncertainty, for instance, by exploring different plausible scenarios of the world of work. And third, it allows to craft creative new solutions. We are currently implementing a project where we push the boundaries of strategic foresight. First, we tailor existing methods to the reality of the world of work and ILO constituents. Second, change itself is changing. Instead of looking at the major trends and transitions, we look at disruptions, radical change. And third, we zoom in on the use of AI to leverage strategic foresight. Now, finally, the how question. So there are different tools out there to do this foresight. As Actraf ILO, in collaboration with our training center, the ITC, we have been exploring tools like horizon scanning, where you look at multiple drivers of change. So you go broad and long term, spanning how, for instance, tech impacts on labor markets and your organization. Or, for instance, scenario development, where you look at different plausible scenarios from more optimistic to more pessimistic. Another tool is road mapping, so how to bring these scenarios to what to do today to arrive at or avoid a particular scenario. And as mentioned earlier, we are currently developing additional tools to deal with disruptions, that is to assess sensitivity to disruptions, how disruptions may evolve over time, impact and expose structural vulnerabilities of the organization.
Contingency planning isn't new. Thinking about the future isn't new. How is this different?
So it's certainly related to contingency planning. However, it's different in the sense that contingency planning is about preparing for a specific disruption. So it's more narrow, practical, and operational regarding a very specific disruption and developing a concrete playbook to deal with that. Whereas strategic foresight is about exploring multiple futures. So it's broader, it's more exploratory, it's more creative. So it's about developing as an organization the mental muscle to deal with complexity, uncertainty, and disruption. And as mentioned earlier, this may also touch upon structural underlying vulnerabilities of different sorts of potential disruptions.
Sure. So let's maybe bring it back a little bit to the services that we as the ILO provide to our constituents. What does that look like? What does strategic foresight look like for employers and workers' organizations specifically?
Yeah. So strategic foresight allows for our social partners to prepare for major change, to rehearse different potential disruptions, to reflect upon multiple shocks before they happen, to push emerging small signals of change further, and stress test their organization or broader system under these potential future shocks. So this matters to social partners because we are obliged to stay relevant, and that means that we have to develop an ability to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and change, including increasingly disruptive change. And this is key to continue to deliver on realizing decent work and social justice for all. It also feeds into social dialogue, being better prepared as social partners for discussing the key issues of the future world of work. And you remember that we learned from COVID-19 that the most vulnerable suffer most during moments of shock. So we owe it to them to better develop the ability to anticipate, to prepare, and to respond to these shocks. And this to avoid that every disruption translates into a crisis or a conflict. Because a shock only becomes a disruption if you're not able, if the organization is not ready to deal with the disruption.
We'll hear from a few constituents who had the pleasure of taking part in a strategic foresight workshop at the end of last year. But before that, let's talk a little bit about AI. You mentioned putting AI into the mix. How exactly does that come into play in terms of strategic foresight?
Sure. So foresight is about identifying drivers of change, spotting weak signals, developing scenarios, exploring different futures. AI can support with that. It's pretty impressive. However, there are certain things it can do and certain things it cannot. AI can support gathering a lot of information, synthesizing, translating trends into scenarios, but also translating scenarios into visuals, videos, or games to enhance an immersive learning experience. It's almost unlimited. However, there are certain things it can't do. For instance, sense making is for humans, so AI can support this creative, strategic thinking exercise, but you still have to do the work. So for workers, employers, and governments, it does exactly that. It provides support in analyzing trends, spotting emerging signals, looking for interlinkages, assessing potential and plausible impacts. But again, it is still for our constituency to give sense to it.
Rafael, in December, you organized a workshop with ILO constituents at the International Training Center in Turin, Italy. I had the pleasure of being there, and during the workshop, we were able to speak with two participants, Melissa Ansell-Bridges, who is the National Secretary of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, and Giorgio Barovic, who represented the Montenegrin Employers Federation. Let's hear what they had to say about how unions and employers view this approach to preparing for disruption.
Well, look, I suppose at our heart, unions are always thinking about how do we help our members? How do we help working people? It's one thing to be responsive to workers' needs in the moment, but actually, if we're going to make a real difference, then we need to be able to look ahead to the future. And, there are plenty of tools which exist, which we regularly use, which will help us do that this year, maybe the next year. But we know that, as Rafael has discussed, that the changes that we're seeing right now are happening so rapidly, and there's so much uncertainty with them as well, that actually those tools that we've been relying on are of limited use. If we're really going to be doing this in a meaningful way, we need to be able to look further afield into the future. And we need to be able to use a tool like strategic foresight, which holds space for uncertainty, for multiple different futures, for the complexity, which, as trade unions, we deal with on a daily basis anyway, but is made so much more so with the kinds of challenges that we're facing now. But also, it's not just about how we respond to the risks that these challenges pose, but also how do we maximize the potential benefits and the opportunities of them as well for working people. And then lastly, I suppose for unions, one thing that I know to be true is that there's always more that we would like to be able to do than what we're going to be resourced for, right? And I think that that's probably true for a lot of us, more broadly than unions as well. But what it means is that, especially when posed with all of these challenges, is that we need to be really strategic with where we're putting our resources. What are we investing in? What skills are we trying to develop in our people to prepare ourselves for the future? What technologies are we investing in? What approaches are we taking to organizing? What policy research are we doing? And so using a tool like strategic foresight allows us to be really strategic with where we put our resources to be best prepared for the future.
Strategic foresight in our country could be explained like astrological natal chart, and we all want to have an astrological natal chart for the company, and we don't know what will happen in the future. But when we come from the stars on the earth, reality is not too familiar, we're not too good, and when we speak about future, we always think about something bad will happen in future, and it's reality. And companies are different, the diversity of companies, because we speak about the small companies who need strategic foresight, but they don't have any kind of resources, any kind of thoughts about strategic foresight, because they're dealing with daily business problems. They just think about tomorrow, not the foresight for the 1 month, 1 year, or 7, 10 years upfront, but that could be very challenging. I want to say thanks for the ILO, because this kind of opportunities to share with us and create some programs for the companies, being business members organization, to improve strategic foresight, to reduce costs of the strategic foresight experts for different kind of companies. And in our country, we are trying to help them how to strategic foresight to deal with different types of problems, because we are a small country, and I think that we are aware of everything what's happening in the world. We want to help them, and we can together, we can speak, we can help with the help of ILO and International Training Center. That could be a good opportunity for the strategic foresight.
Rafael, what do you think?
I think I couldn't agree more with both Melissa and Giorgio. First, starting with Melissa. So indeed, trade unions, workers are facing multiple transformations in the world of work. I think Melissa mentioned various, underlying the need to deal with complexity, uncertainty, and change. So yeah, I think that's the first element. But then also second, I think Melissa mentions the implications for resources. And I think she's very right. It's not only about resources, but also resourcefulness. So what are the resources that you have, and then the strategic use of these resources. And then with regard to the input of Giorgio, so yeah, I think many organizations are confronted with that. We don't have time for this. Everybody's taken up with daily business, but it's really about taking a step back of your daily business, taking the luxury of doing that, which in the end will save you time. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with both views of Melissa and Georgia, and I think it really shows, I think, the relevance for both workers and employers organizations.
Rafael, with that in mind, and before we wrap up, what is the one thing that you think that we should all be doing, workers, employers, decision makers, and government, to begin preparing for the future?
So maybe I take the opportunity to come back to one idea I mentioned before, and that is really the essence. So it is about developing a mental muscle of thinking forward, really long term, of dealing with uncertainty, developing different scenarios, of gathering information systematically, and building that into your daily organizational practice. So today it may be disruption and AI, tomorrow it may be something else, but the muscle to navigate that complexity, uncertainty, and disruption, that will be there.
Well, thank you, Rafael, for being with us and for sharing your thoughts. As we've heard today, strategic foresight is not about predicting what will happen, but about expanding our capacity to imagine what's possible, to prepare and to shape for the future of work we want. If you'd like to know more about the ILO's work on strategic foresight, you can find resources and links in the episode notes. You can and also should follow us on social media, on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn at International Labour Organization, and on Instagram, X, Blue Sky, and Threads at ILO.org. Thanks again for being with us. I'm Justin Smith, and we'll see you next time on the Future of Work podcast.